Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today we are going to be looking at the second race weekend of the season at the Jeddah Corniche circuit in Saudi Arabia. It has only been just over 100 days since the circuit was last raced at in its inaugural Grand Prix in December, a race truly like no other, which saw two red flags and a tantalising battle up front, in which Lewis Hamilton ran into the back of title rival Max Verstappen before coming back to win the Grand Prix, making them level on points going into the final race of the season. You can listen to the podcast on the streaming platform of your choice, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all of which are linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 49. Sadly, Saudi Arabia will be yet another sans Sebastian Vettel weekend, who is yet to have given a negative COVID test. He missed the first race of the season in Bahrain, and he will unfortunately be missing out once again, to be replaced by Nico Hülkenberg. I hope that Seb will be back to full health in 2 weeks' time in Australia. Friday's free practice sessions saw Charles Leclerc top the times twice, ahead of Max Verstappen. Other takeaways from the first day of the weekend include the drivers having struggled in the final turn, number 27, which was reprofiled and widened for 2022, at which Max Verstappen crashed in qualifying last year. Verstappen, Gasly and Bottas all had issues there, locking up. It is also clear that porpoising is still an issue, as Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton both complained about bouncing in FP1. Friday was also a difficult day for Haas, as Kevin Magnussen was only able to complete 2 installation laps in FP1, being forced to stay in the pit lane with a hydraulics leak. The Dane's still suffering from the issues that he faced in qualifying last time out at Bahrain, and facing similar problems in the evening session. Both Ferraris had scares at the barriers in FP2, Carlos Sainz skimming the wall at turn 13, and teammate Charles Leclerc bumping into the turn 4 apex, leading to a broken suspension for the Monegasque. Alonso and Norris both had issues at turn 11, the former nearly losing the car on the exit of the corner, while the latter skipped over the thick curb. Yuki Tsunoda was also plagued with reliability issues at the tail end of FP2, the car coming to a halt on track. The day was highlighted, though, by incidents that occurred just under 6 miles away. The afternoon's free practice session was delayed by 15 minutes due to a missile strike at an Aramco-run oil depot near the track. The strike, which originated from the Yemeni Houthi rebel group, resulted in a very large fire, followed by a large black cloud of smoke. All drivers and team principals were briefed by F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali and FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem. And despite the team principals being unanimous in their decision to continue the race weekend, the drivers were less sure. But after opinions of the members of the Grand Prix Drivers Association were voiced, all drivers eventually agreed that the race should go ahead. In these situations, safety is always the main concern, and not only for the drivers, but the engineers, caterers, and everyone else who follows the F1 circus from race to race. These people must, in my opinion, feel safe for the race to continue. But, thankfully, none of the drivers felt unsafe in the end, and the F1 action continued on Saturday morning with FP3. FP3 saw Leclerc once again top the standings with the best time of the weekend, just ahead of the 2 Red Bulls. Sainz was in 4th, with Bottas following behind. Ocon was ahead of Gasly, who faced clutch issues in the closing stages, his teammate Tsunoda shaking off some of the woes of Friday in P10. Magnussen made up for lost time in P8 at a track which he has never raced at, and Alonso followed. Hamilton was in P11, ahead of teammate Russell in 14th. Schumacher and Guan Yu split the 2 Mercedes, with Stroll in 15th. McLaren had a poor day once again, with Ricciardo in 16th and Norris second to last, with Albon at 17th and Hülkenberg at P18. Latifi was dead last, ahead of the second qualifying session of the season. Q1 of qualifying saw the Ferraris on top, with Max Verstappen following close behind. But their early progress was obstructed by an early red flag, courtesy of Nicholas Latifi, who lost the rear end at turn 13. After the red flag, Hamilton, who had been struggling throughout the weekend, was knocked out in Q1 after briefly achieving safety before being pushed back down into the bottom 5 by Lance Stroll, his first Q1 exit since Brazil of 2017, in which he crashed out. Hamilton would, though, qualify ahead of Albon, Hülkenberg, Latifi, who crashed out, and Tsunoda, who suffered with a fuel issue, that Red Bull engine having performed worryingly poorly so far this season. Q2 was next, and this session saw a frightening high-speed crash for Mick Schumacher, who was taken to hospital after he totaled his Haas car midway through the second qualifying session. This accident would sadly spell the end of Schumacher's weekend, but he was thankfully uninjured by this horrific incident. The hour-long red flag was followed by two Ferraris topping the time once again, the prancing horse having taken the top spot in every session so far this weekend. Norris and Ricciardo were 11 and 12, followed by Zhou and the hospitalised Mick Schumacher. Ocon was barred from Q3 by Ricciardo of McLaren, who impeded a strong flying lap from the Frenchman, who ended up in 15th. Finally, for Q3, and it was Sergio Perez who made it his very first pole position in F1 with an astounding time of 1:28.2, 11 years to the date since his debut in F1, and 215 races, becoming the first Mexican to put it on pole, as well as breaking the record set by Mark Webber of the longest front row start, of the longest time between, or longest wait for a pole position in F1. The two Ferraris finished 2 and 3, with Leclerc taking his second front row start of the season. Max Verstappen disappointed with a P4 finish, commenting afterwards that he had no grip, despite having felt comfortable in the car in Q1 and 2. Esteban Ocon was a great P5, taking his first top 5 finish since Spain of last year. Russell was in 6th after a difficult start to the weekend for Mercedes, with Alonso behind in 7th. Valtteri Bottas was in 8th, 5 places up on his teammate. Pierre Gasly was at P9, and Kevin Magnussen rounded out the top 10. Now for a new segment in our race reviews, in which I will lay out my driver of qualifying, team of qualifying, and struggle of qualifying. For me, the driver of qualifying was undoubtedly Sergio Perez. Throughout his Red Bull career so far, he had only been out-qualified by his teammate once before, at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix of last year. So to put it on pole at a track that had been dominated by the Ferraris all weekend, and to qualify 3 places ahead of his teammate is very impressive. Congratulations to Checo. Next, for my team of qualifying, and I have to give it to Alpine, who were proving to be quite the force to be reckoned with in the midfield this season, with a very strong P5 and P7 finish in quali, their best since last year's Qatar Grand Prix. Finally, for my struggle of qualifying, and it has to be Lewis Hamilton, who had his worst qualifying, including DNFs, in 5 seasons, down in P16, and his worst on pure pace since 2009. He had a lot of work to do for Sunday. So, quite the qualifying session, with Sergio Perez setting some Formula 1 history with that pole. But would the race deliver? Let's find out. Sunday began with the news that Daniel Ricciardo had been handed a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Esteban Ocon in qualifying, moving the Aussie down to 14th, and everyone behind Mick Schumacher was promoted by 1 place after the German's crash, including Lewis Hamilton. And before the race had even begun, another retirement occurred, as Yuki Tsunoda retired with yet more engine issues, the Japanese driver having faced similar issues in qualifying on Saturday. So the race began at 8 o'clock local time, with Perez leading away. Verstappen made up a place on Sainz, with Magnussen making a very brave move around the outside of Pierre Gasly at turn 4, followed by Norris, who did the same. Guan Yu Zhou had some issues getting off the grid, but he was able to keep ahead of Williams man Latifi. George Russell moved up into the top 5 on Esteban Ocon into the final corner with a silky move round the outside on lap 3. Gasly went down the inside of Norris, regaining one of the positions that he had lost at the final turn. After a number of laps of strong battle between the Alpine teammates, which nearly led to contact on the start-finish straight multiple times, Alonso was finally able to overtake Ocon at turn 1. But Ocon was soon back in front, having left the track at turn 1 and overtaken his teammate on lap 8. Ocon, though, was forced to give the position back a lap later, before again going for the attack on Alonso, closely followed by Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas. Hamilton made it a third place gained on lap 10, going down the inside of Lance Stroll to make it P12 for the 7-time world champion. Lewis then made yet another move, this time on Lando Norris on lap 12, before the Alpines once again locked horns. Ocon being forced to bail out at turn 1 again. Zhou Guanyu was given a 5-second penalty on lap 13 for having gained an advantage off the track, before Esteban Ocon was asked to hold position on teammate Alonso. This gave Valtteri Bottas the opportunity that he needed to make the move on a slowing Alonso, going up to 7th. Lance Stroll and Alex Albon pitted on lap 14, both going for the medium compound tyre, as Lewis Hamilton continued to improve, moving into the points positions with a move on Pierre Gasly. Leclerc called the bluff of Perez on lap 16, as they threatened the pit stop, resulting in Perez pitting and Leclerc staying out, taking the lead. Leclerc came across a stroke of luck with this move, as Latifi crashed out on lap 17, getting a snap of oversteer on the final corner and careering into the wall, leading to the majority of the field boxing, and Leclerc and Verstappen coming out ahead of Perez, the Mexican pitting at the most unlucky of times. The safety car that was brought out by Latifi's accident came in at the end of lap 20, and Leclerc led away. Further back, Russell made a great move on Magnussen, and Perez let Sainz through, having pushed him wide at turn 1 during the safety car period. Lewis Hamilton made yet another move into the final turn, before he got the Brit right back at turn 1 with the aid of DRS. Lewis made the move again on Kevin Magnussen at turn 1, this time making the move stick. Hülkenberg, who ended up in 9th after the safety car, was swiftly swallowed by Ocon, Ricciardo and Bottas, the Aston Martin not being able to fight the pace of the midfield. Zhou Guanyu was given a drive-through penalty on lap 27, having unfortunately not served his 5-second penalty correctly. Hülkenberg slipped further back on lap 29, falling behind Gasly and Norris, as Leclerc extended his lead out front, setting the new fastest lap of the race. On lap 35, Fernando Alonso made the overtake on Kevin Magnussen into turn 1 for P7, the Dane yet to have pitted by this point, before Alonso began to slow, being overtaken by Magnussen and Ocon, and then reporting a loss of power due to an overtaking issue and falling back behind the field before retiring the car. This came only a lap before Daniel Ricciardo retired due to an issue as well, parking at the front of the pit lane on lap 38. Valtteri Bottas was the next to retire, having come in prior to Daniel Ricciardo's issue. The pit lane was then closed, after Alonso parked up at the mouth of the pit lane as well, bringing out the virtual safety car. However, Magnussen was able to pit before the pit lane's closure. This all meant that it was too late for Lewis Hamilton to box, to replace his cooked hard tyres. Hamilton was forced to box for new tyres a lap later after 41 laps on the old hards, the Brit falling to 12th. This was all set up for a straight fight between Leclerc and Verstappen for victory, Verstappen taking the lead at the final corner before Leclerc outbraked him at turn 1 of lap 43. They both locked up at the final corner of lap 44, Max Verstappen losing out, as Leclerc swept round the outside of the Dutchman. Max went down the inside of Leclerc at lap 47,